Gute Sichas Chelek Chavav, Teruma Aleph, Lili Nishmas Rabbi Yosef Ben Yamin Ben Rabbi Nasha Kaltman. We are also learning L'schos our dear friend Yosef Shlema Ben Risha for a Refuah Shlema Ukreva. Fascinating Rashi Sicha with a beautiful lesson at the end. What is the mitzvah of V'asu Li Mikdash? If a pasuk b'tchilas pashaseinu V'asu Li Mikdash v'zachanti b'seicham is Rashi Maitik Tiverter V'asu Li Mikdash uniz Mefarish V'asu Li Shmi Bayis or base kedusha. Pasuk says, "Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell amongst them." Rashi says, "V'asu li migdash," and he translates, "Make for my name or for my sake a house of holiness." Learn in Mefarshim. As Rashi is Mefarish dot tzvei bezonder v'edes. The Mefarshim understand that Rashi is actually translating two separate words, which means that Rashi is addressing two separate concepts. Aleph, as a taish from Li, is Lishmi. Number one, that the translation of Li, the meaning of Li for me, is for my name. And Beis, as Mikdash means Bayis Kedusha, or Beis Kedusha. The word Mikdash means a house of holiness. Ukidela come on Siv Gimel, as we will elaborate in Siv Gimel. So if this is the case, if it's two separate things, why is it included under the same heading? Why is it in the same Dibra Maschil? As is Rashi's custom in the overwhelming majority of his commentary on Torah. It should have been two separate headings. Li, the word Li from the pasuk, which means Lishmi, for the sake of my name, or for my sake. Mikdash, the word Mikdash quoted from the pasuk, means Beis Kedusha, a house of holiness. First, that's the first question. Why does Rashi put two different ideas into the same Dibra Maschil? Beis Eiches nit move on. Was is Rashi meitik in dem Dibra Maschil echt dem Wort V'asu? Why does Rashi include in the Dibra Maschil the word V'asu? And then again, he repeats it in the body of the actual explanation. So he says, V'asu li migdash, V'asu li shmi beis kedusha. In the word V'asu, the Rashi ganot b'chadish. In the word V'asu, Rashi is not explaining anything. He's just quoting. The word Li is telling me Lishmi. The word Mikdash is telling me Beis Kedusha. But what about the word V'asu? Why should the V'asu be included in the Dibra Maschil? Why should the word V'asu be repeated in the explanation of Rashi? So that's two general questions over Rashi. Why are there two different ideas in the same Dibra Maschil? And why does Rashi include the word V'asu? In Sif Beis, the Rebbe is going to discuss Li Lishmi. In Sif Gimel, the Rebbe is going to discuss Mikdash Beis Kedusha. And in Sif Dalet, the Rebbe is going to begin the biur, the explanation of this Rashi. Sif Beis. In them, Rashi is Mefarish Li Lishmi Daf Verstein. When Rashi says Li, that it means Lishmi for my sake, we have to understand. The Gemara sagt, as V'asu Li Mikdash make Mishali. The Gemara says that when it says make for me a Mikdash, it means from mine. As Neustin Mehem Umnim Bischaran, that from the Eibush there's coffers, you pay the workmen for their work. And Batsoldi Umnin Fazer Arbet Bedekabayis, we pay the workers for the building or the maintenance of the Beis Hamikdash, Mishali, from mine, Bitmaman Hektish the Bedekabayis, from the money that was donated towards the maintenance of the Beis Hamikdash. So that's how the Gemara says it, Mishali. And if you're going to say 1 second, that's Gemara. Does this work in the world of Pshat? Says the Rebbe, it does. We find this also in the Pshat world. Rashi is Mefarish and Pasuk and Parshas Tildos, where Rashi in a Pasuk and Parshas Tildos explains, take for me, Rivka says to Yaakov, take for me 2 goats. Says Rashi, they're mine. Shekach Kasav, because this is what Yitzchak wrote to Rivka in his Ksuba, that he's going to give her 2 goats per day. So Li means Mishali. So in the Gemara it says on this pasuk V'asu Li Mikdash Mishali, from mine. This works in the Pshutei Shel Mikra as we see that it's Parshas Tildos. So based on this you have to explain. Was is der Hechrech Pshutei Shel Mikra zu Mishane Zayin u'Mefare Zayin da Li Lishmi. Why does Rashi have to change from the explanation in the Gemara that said Mishali and instead to say Lishmi? What's the purpose for that? Why can't Rashi follow the approach of the Gemara that Li means Lishmi? That Li means Mishali. Why does Rashi say that it's Lishmi and not Mishali? Now, es ist da an Arichis und Mefarshim, was einen Masber für was Rashi kenne Teitschen was zu Migdash, wie der Pirish Ragil bekam Mekaimis in Li, bis für Li Litzarki v'geit bezeh. The Mefarshim do debate, do discuss. Why can't Li just mean for me? Like the simple meaning of Li is for me. In other words, the Gemara says Mishali. Rashi says Lishmi. So the Mefarshim say, 1 second, why can't it just mean for me? So the Rebbe doesn't mention it in the Pnim of the Sikha. In the order, the Rebbe gives 2 examples. For example, one would be that you can't say about Hashem for my needs, because Hashem doesn't need anything. So you can't say Li Litzarki for my needs. Another period that he brings in the Ha'ara is that Li is superfluous, because since it says V'shachanti, I am going to dwell, clearly it's for the Eibusher to dwell. You don't need V'asu Li Mikdash, make a Mikdash V'shachanti. So the Mefarshim discuss why these reasons and other reasons why we wouldn't translate Li to mean for me. Aber Echli Pirusham bleibt nicht moving für was Rashi sagt Li Lishmi und nimmt nicht an Pirusha Parshas Tildus Pirush HaGemara Li Mishali. But none of those Mefarshim address the question why Rashi chooses to go with the translation with Lishmi and not as the Gemara says it and as Rashi self said it in Tildus Mishali. So now the Rebbe suggests an answer which the Rebbe will immediately refute. We can explain as follows. And the very beginning of the Sedra, where Eibishter says, and they should take for me a Teruma, is Rashi Mefaresh v'yikchu li Teruma li lishmi. It should be for my name. Over there where it's talking about the money that is going to be donated by the Yidden from their own pockets to the Eibishter. So you can't say that it means from mine, because they're giving it from their own pockets. So over there it can't be Mishali, and therefore Rashi says Lishmi. So the Rebbe is suggesting, since the first li in the beginning of the Sedra means Mishali from mine, means Lishmi, means for my name, is Mistaber Loimar, makes sense to say. As Eichter Li State that also the li that's in the same context a little bit further down. Just a few psukim later, it has the same meaning. In other words, maybe for the sake of consistency, Rashi wants that both li's should mean the same thing. By v'yikchu li Teruma, it means li lishmi, and therefore by yasu li mikdash, it also means li lishmi. Maybe that's the explanation, the consistency. Aber kadaikis, but if you look a little bit deeper, is adarabah hapirush darv zayin andrish. Not only is there no room for consistency, on the contrary, they must be different. Why? The kavanah lishmi l'shem Hashem, the idea that you're giving this for the sake of the name of Hashem, is verbunden mit shinui reshus, is connected with the fact that you're changing ownership. It's going from the private person to the possession of hektish of the holy. So it says that mastic was magitas bepoil to hektish. So it's not enough that you actually give the money. But in your mind, you have to designate that it's for Hashem. In other words, what makes it holy? What makes it to go over to hektish? Not only the fact that you're giving the cash or the materials to the kohen, but you have to have in mind it's lishmi. So the idea of lishmi, the idea of being for the sake of Hashem, is connected with the fact that it's changing owners. Is in pasuk v'yikchu Teruma v'osretzech v'egin yafrishu li mamamenom. So because of that, when the first pasuk of v'yikchu Teruma, which is discussing designating or separating their money, makti zaymam and chulin, to sanctify the mundane money, is verstandig for was das darf sein mit der kavanah lishmi. So obviously it has to be for the sake of Hashem, so that way it could actually be transferred into the ownership, into the possession of Hashem. Moshe in the pasuk also limit das was letztlich wegen der Teruma, welcher ist schön geworden am menaktisch und gefindt sich was akedes, but in was limit das, where we're discussing the money that already became holy and it's already in the possession bishus hektish. Was fällt da in der Scheiches zum Ewigsten, als man soll nochmal davon sagen lishmi? What is lacking in its connection to Hashem that you have to say again lishmi? It already belongs to Hashem. It already was given. It was already designated to Hashem. Besigne nachher. To put this in other words, Dav Giderfar, but Rashi learned as Yikchu Teruma meant Li Lishmi, specifically because Rashi already said that the Yikchu Li means Lishmi, Adas is Shein Givendi Kavan Lishmi, that there was already a donation that was done for the sake of Hashem, is Mer Mistaber Tzagan. It makes more sense to say as Mitzvah Asu Li Mikdash made the Torah Tzmadik Zayin and Underuftu. This would make more sense to say that the Torah is implying something else. As the Asiyah Zazai Mishali, for example, that it should be done Mishali from the account of the Eibishter. Because we already know Lishmi. We already know that this was given to Hashem. So not only, as we said in the previous page, that why do we have to give it to Hashem if it's already His, but Signa Acher says even more than that. Once I know V'yikchu li Teruma means Lishmi, if the Torah again says Li, it makes the most sense that the Torah wants to teach me something that I don't already know. And therefore, this brings us back to our original question of this Seif. Why does Rashi choose to go with Li, Lishmi, and not, as the Gemara teaches, Mishali? Now we go to Seif Gimel, where we're going to discuss Bayis or Beis Kedusha. Let us adapt from Hoben Abir and see in Pirish Rashi, Mikdash Beis Kedusha. Vaz Bavar and the Rashi. What is Rashi addressing? What's bothering Rashi here that needs to be explained? And why does he change and introduce a new term where the pasuk says Mikdash and Rashi says Beis Kedusha? Now, late in Mizrahi, Bavar and Rashi, according to the Re'im, Rabbi Mizrahi, Rashi is addressing the following: as Mikdash meant nit eze davar mekudash yiyah. The Mikdash doesn't mean a random item that should become holy. Nor bayis mekudash, a holy house. Kishay Mikdash b'chol makom lo yimatzei kima bayis mekudash. Because the name Mikdash refers specifically to the holy house, the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. In other words, when you say the word Mikdash, I don't know what it means. It could be a table that's made holy. There's no indication that it's referring to a structure. And therefore Rashi has to say bayis kedusha, a house, a structure that is holy, to tell me that it means a bayis. And as he explains, when we use the term mikdash, we mean the Beis Hamikdash, or possibly something connected to that. But the Rebbe has a great question on this explanation. The word mikdash states in Friya in Parshas Bashalach. Mikdash adnai kenenu yodecha. The word mikdash was already written previously. Is a ba mikdash darfu is kitayz werden das meint bais kedusha. If it's necessary, according to the aim, that I don't know what mikdash means, that it's a house of holiness, and I need specifically to be told that it means a house of holiness. Rashi should have already done this in Bishalach the first time the Torah mentions the word mikdash. Aber Adrabah, nit nor bavorin test nit Rashi dort. Not only does Rashi not say anything, nor from Lashon Rashi dort, but from the context of Rashi later in the next Rashi is muchach as a nemt es on alzadover muvonu pashut as mikdash is Beis Hamikdash. Rashi speaks about it as if it's the Beis Hamikdash, which means that Rashi, he doesn't translate the word mikdash, but later he refers to it as to the psukim, as he says that kainenu yodecha. The Beis Hamikdash was built with two hands. The world was created with one hand. Beis Hamikdash with two hands to show the greatness of the Beis Hamikdash. So he doesn't even say that Mikdash means the Beis Hamikdash. He just goes on to give a beer that implies that it's obvious that it's the Beis Hamikdash. So if according to the aim, Mikdash is not clear to us what it means and needs to be explained, Rashi didn't explain it in Bishalach, and because he didn't, obviously Rashi believes that we know what Mikdash means. So in that case, we're back to our question: why does Rashi? What is Rashi trying to tell us, and why does he change to the words bayis or beis kedusha? Additionally, another question on the approach of the Re'im. If the ganzer uftu von Rashi is as mikdash meint a bayis und nit ezadav mekudash. If Rashi's novelty, if the Rashi's contribution here is that mikdash means the house and not any other random item, Rashi could have just said the words Beis Hamikdash. Why does Rashi change both from the pasuk that says mikdash and from the common expression between people and in Chazal, Beis Hamikdash, when anstatt mikdash sagt kedusha, and then instead of the word mikdash he says kedusha? In other words, if the whole point was to say that it's a bayis, say Beis Hamikdash. And these same 2 points could be used to question on the Pirush of the other Mefarshim. And Rashi Kumpavarn, and they say, what's bothering Rashi? What's bothering Rashi is like this. How could you command the Yidden to make a mikdash, to make a holy place? The holiness doesn't come from the Yidden. The holiness comes from Hashem. So how could you command someone to make something holiness if they don't have it in their ability to make the holiness? Is Rashi Mefarish, as the Tziva is Sumach and Abayis Kedusha. And therefore the Mefarish would say that Rashi's Chiddush is that the commandment on the Yidden is to build a house, the structure, and the Eibishter will then infuse it with holiness. So that's the Mefarshim's explanation. What's bothering Rashi? How can we make something holy? The answer is the mitzvah, we should make a house, and the Eibishter will make it holy. So the same 2 questions that we had previously or similar applies to this. Warum genau from Pirush Rashi and Parshas B'Shalach? Warum genau from Pirush Rashi and all Parshas B'Shalach is muchach as samus the pshita as mikdash is the shema mekutzer from Beis HaMikdash. From Parshas B'Shalach, from the context of Rashi, it's clear that mikdash is just a shortened name of Beis HaMikdash. Und es ist nicht nötig, die Bewahrnis, als wir also die Mikdash meinten Beis HaMikdash und nicht die Kedusha Shabbai. And once we know that Mikdash means the Beis HaMikdash, then we don't need to be told that we're referring to the structure and not to the holiness. We're referring to the Beis HaMikdash. Und euch genau, and again, like the previous question, if the mitzvah is to build a building, then he should have called it Beis HaMikdash, which has the word base in it, a house. So we know that it's a building. But we don't have to say Beis Kedusha, which is a totally new expression that is not in the pasuk, nor is it in the common expression. So that brings us to the beer. So let's quickly summarize our questions. Question number 1 is, why are there, according to the Mefarshim, that these are 2 separate things, why are they in the same Dibur Maschil? Question number 2, why the word va'asu? Question number 3, why does Rashi taich li means lishmi and not misha li as the Gemara taiches? And number 4, why does Rashi say Beis Kedusha? What's bothering Rashi? What's Rashi telling us? And if you're going to say that Rashi is trying to tell us that it has to be a building, then why why do we not know that from Mikdash in Parshas B'Shalach? And why does Rashi use the term Beis Kedusha and not Beis HaMikdash? The beer b'chozen. So the Rebbe says the beer is as follows. The shaila ikis was Rashi kum farem from Bipirushay. The main question that's bothering Rashi, that Rashi is coming to explain, is vi pas da der lashon v'asu li mikdash. Why? How does the term mikdash apply over here? The name mikdash batzitzich doch zum Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. The term mikdash generally refers to the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Ubelashon hakasav anal Parshas B'Shalach, as we can see it from the pasuk in B'Shalach, where the previous pasuk says, you will bring him to the mountain of your heritage, referring to the Bahar Abayis. And then he continues, a temple that will be built by the hands of established by the hands of Hashem, implying to the Beis HaMikdash, which is built on the Har Abayis, on Har Nachaloscha. Here we're talking about the Mishkan in the Midbar. What's with angerufen because of B'Shem Mishkan, which generally is called Mishkan in the Psukim. Uvi steht gleich in the pasuk Shlacher, as the pasuk immediately after this one says, Eis Tavnis HaMishkan, the layout of the Mishkan. So they should have just said Mishkan. What's bothering Rashi is, why does the pasuk say Mikdash and not Mishkan? So this leads to a discussion about what does Mikdash mean. Is Mikdash referring to the Mishkan, or is Mikdash referring to all the Batei Mikdashes, the Mishkan and all the Batei Mikdashes for the later years, which we've had a number of sikhs on this in the previous Chalakim. And here in the previous Chalakim it was mentioned between the Rambam and the Ramban. Here the Rebbe mentions the Eir HaChaim and says that Rashi doesn't agree. The Eir HaChaim meant for it. As the Eir HaChaim says that the V'asu li mikdash is an overarching mitzvah that is inclusive of all times and all places, whether in the Midbar, whether after they entered into Eretz Yisrael. And the next pasuk where it says Mishkan begins the details as they were applicable to the Midbar, Sheyasa Mishkan, Kesei the Ramah in the Parsha, that he should build a Mishkan according to the design that was written in the Parsha. So also the Mikdash means there has to be at all times a mikdash, and in the midbar it's going to be a mishkan. And then it would make sense why the pasuk says mikdash, because it's not referring specifically to the mishkan; it's referring to all of the bati mikdashes. Rashi is aber shel dem pirush. Rashi, however, says that Rebbe negates this pirush. Well, how do we know? In the next pasuk that says, as everything I have shown you, the layout of the Mishkan, etc., is Rashi mefarish hamikra hazeh mechuber lemikra shalamai leimenu. This pasuk is connected to the previous pasuk, as if it's to say, "Va'osu li mikdash, make for me a mikdash." I'm going to show you. So from this is understood as that when the two psukim together say, make for me a mikdash, as I will show you the layout of the Mishkan, is ein dezel b'tzivoy, is one and the same commandment. So in that case, why use the word mikdash in the first place? If we were talking about the Beis HaMikdash as well, so use a general term mikdash. But if, as Rashi says, it's one mitzvah, just say the word mishkan. Nochmer. Late then Pirush Rashi is in dem tzivi beferish nit nichol der mikdash laderes. According to this Rashi, that is connecting the words v'asu li mikdash and eis tavnis hamishkan, then they can't be talking about the Beis HaMikdash. Varum der tzivi dois umachen hamikdash kechol asher animara eis ches tavnis hamishkan, because this commandment is to make a mikdash in the shape of the mishkan, as described in the psukim. Und der Beis HaMikdash is nicht getavnes HaMishkan. And we know that the Beis HaMikdash was not built in the same layout as the Mishkan. The Mishkan was 30 amas. The Beis HaMikdash was 100 amas, for example. And many, many other differences in the building of the Mishkan compared to the Mishkan, of the Mikdash compared to the Mishkan. Was der Far is Rashi Medayik. The Rebbe adds in the parentheses, which is why Rashi has to explain, as der tzivu shebesil makosov v'chein tasu l'doiris, that when it says in the end of the pasuk, so you shall do, and Rashi explains that this is referring to the generations to come, the future generations. Rashi explains, but tzitzich davke nor zu di kleya mishkan, as they darfen gemach v'en ketavnes elu. That refers to the furnishings of the mishkan, that in the future generations they should be made as a carbon copy of the way it was done in the Mishkan. But you can't say v'chein tas lo deris about the Mishkan itself, because the later structures were different. So clearly, when it says v'asu li mikdash, it means the Mishkan. It can't mean the Beis HaMikdash, because as Rashi says, the two psukim are connected, and Tavnas HaMishkan is different than the Mikdash. So this is what's bothering Rashi. Why would the pasuk Why wouldn't the pasuk just say v'yasu li mishkan v'shachanti b'seicham? Make for me a mishkan, and I'll dwell amongst them, and I don't have a mikdash. In order to answer this question, why is the mishkan being called mikdash? Rashi mefarish as mikdash in the pasuk made base kedusha. That mikdash over here means a house of holiness. Der word mikdash is done nit als Hashem davar mekutzer from Beis HaMikdash. The word mikdash is not the name of a specific building, just in short form. That it's really the Beis HaMikdash, but we're going to call it mikdash. Nor als opteich word Hashem hatayar otchunu von azach. It's an adjective. It's describing something. Abaye shel kedusha nit shel. It should be a house of holiness, not a mundane house, not an unholy house. But does pass off a mishkan punkt v'yaf a mikdash, which works. V'yasu li mikdash, make for me a house of holiness, which works very, very. In other words, if we thought mikdash means Beis HaMikdash, like we did in Mikdash Adnai Kainanu Yodecha in Parshas B'Shalach, then we're asking, if the commandment is for a mishkan, why say mikdash? Says Rashi, 1 second. Mikdash doesn't mean specifically the Beis HaMikdash. Mikdash means a bayis shel kedusha, a holy house, and that's very and that works for mishkan. And therefore, it could say v'asu li mikdash, and it could mean mishkan. Mikdash meint a zach bayis was hot in zich oder is to lieb kedusha. Mikdash means a house that contains, or its purpose is holiness. Was der far nutzt men dem wort echef mishkan, which is why we could use the word mikdash and it still means mishkan. Besign nacher, in other words, der chiddush von Rashi is not in word bayis, nor in word kedusha. According to the Mizrahi, the chiddush was bayis, that it should be a structure, not a table or another random item. The Rebbe is explaining that Rashi is telling us that the emphasis here is on kedusha, As Mikdash is nita shem davar mekutza from Beis Hamikdash. The Mikdash here is not just a short form of Beis Hamikdash, but it's actually describing to you what you should build. You should build a house of holiness. Und das, was Rashi sagt, Bayis or Beis Kedusha, Af al Pias von Wort Mikdash Gufo le Pirusha Yaposhet, is nicht talking Raya as a Retzich wegen a Bayis. And the fact that Rashi adds the word bias as well, even though there's no indication from the pasuk that we're talking about a house, maybe it's talking about a different item of holiness. Is val bepeil is there davar shel kedusha, but it's not a bias, because in reality that is what it's being referred to. Ultimately, what was being built, a house. So instead of just saying inyan shel kedusha or davar shel kedusha, he says bias kedusha because that's what it's ultimately going to be. Wie verstandig von Hemshech hat sie, wie also the Mikdash Chelek Gamer Tavernas HaMishkan. Was the Rashi does als in Hemshech, as we see from the next pasuk, which according to Rashi is connected to this pasuk, that we're going to be building a Mishkan. Was von dem weiß man, as der Davar shel Kedusha v'chem adav machen, retzich das wegen a bias. So Rashi knows from the next pasuk that we're actually talking about a bias. So it's just easier to add the word bias so we know what we're talking about. But what is the emphasis of Rashi on the word Kedusha? That we're building something that's holy, and therefore, even though what we're actually building is a Mishkan, we could use the word Mikdash because Mikdash means holy. Says the Rabbi in Sifei, but that's not maspik. This still doesn't fully satisfy the question. Because the question was, why not say Mishkan? So you tell me, okay, Mikdash also means Mishkan. But why not? We can ask, why not say Mishkan? What we did until here is we said that Mikdash could mean Mishkan. Es bleibt aber nicht musbar, but it still doesn't explain for was sagt der pasuk dem lashon Mikdash und nutzt nicht dem lashon Ragel parshas was in Mishkan. But still, why does the pasuk use the word Mikdash, which could mean Mishkan, and not use the word Mishkan, which is used in these psukim, in these parshas? Just say it as it is. It seemingly would have been much simpler. That's why Rashi includes. And this is why it's not in two Dibra Maschas, because they're interconnected. Rashi begins his explanation with V'asu Lishmi, as the tzivu in the pasuk is nitnar av der asiyah b'chlal. That the commandment here is not just on the making of the Mishkan, nor as the asiyah muzayin mider kavana lishmi, that the asiyah has to be, the way it's done has to be lishmi, for the sake of Hashem's name. That's why Rashi includes the word V'asu. Because Rashi is telling us that the Asiyah, the building of this Mishkan, has to be Lishmi. In order to explain what does it mean that it has to be Lishmi and why does it have to be Lishmi, as we asked earlier, seemingly this money is already in the possession of Hashem. Is the pasuk Medayik Vasuli Mikdash? That's why the pasuk adds the word Mikdash to explain what we're doing here and why it has to be Lishmi. So in other words, in order to understand why Rashi says Mikdash Bayis Kedusha, Rashi has to start with the Asuli Lishmi, and in order to understand the Asuli Lishmi, the pasuk has to say Mikdash, and Rashi has to say Bayis Kedusha. Bayis Kedusha. The Hasbara in them, and here the Rabbi explains. In the Pirush Vasuli Lishmi is Kamer Leil Safsif Beis Nit Glatik. We read already earlier in Sifes, we asked the question. Since the money already came into the possession of Hektish, because it was donated Lishmi. Why do we need another Lishmi? It's already in the possession of Hashem. Of them, the pasuk Vasuli Mikdash. Therefore, the pasuk says, "Make for me a Mikdash." Was made Kipirish Rashi Vasuli Lishmi Bayis Kedusha. Das was by Va'asu Tav Zayin HaKavanah Miyuchedes Lishmi. The fact that by Va'asu we need a specific intent that is for the sake of Hashem. Meites HaKavanah Neisefes Bayis Kedusha. Nicht nur Bayis Shel Kedusha. A Bayis in welchen sie gefindt sich noch Azach Kedusha. We're not talking about a house of holiness. A house that contains another item which is holiness. Nor as their Bayis Gufa is Kedusha B'choilam. This is a Heliker Bayis. The house has to be a holy house. The reader not base Kedusha, but Bayis Kedusha, a holy house. In other words, the Eibishter wanted not just a house in which holiness will dwell, but that the house itself should be holy. Siskin Kashenit was Rasha sagt Kedusha Lashon Nekeva, warum gefindt as Bayis is ich meshamas be Lashon Nekeva. Don't ask Why Rashi uses the word Kedosha? Because we find places where Bayis is also B'lashon Nekeva, so you could say Bayis Kedosha. But what are we taking from this? The Funas move on. As Asiyas HaMishkan Tutu Fashinu Ikri in the Dvarim Midvelchem Mat Gemachta Mishkan. When making the Mishkan, there was a fundamental change in the very materials that were being used. Zeh Zayin is Kaddish Gevarin. They became holy. Gevarin Atel from the Bayis Kedosha became part of this holy house. Before they were used as part of the building, their holiness consisted of the fact that they were owned by Hektish. Aber durch was oder Mikdash werden sie nicht skadisch, nicht nur, was sie belangen zu hektisch. Nur damit, was sie gufa werden genutzt und werden a Teil von Abayis Kedosha. But once they're built into the building, they become holy not just because they belong to Hashem, but because they're part of a holy house. And therefore, it takes them to the next level. And since this creation, this building is accomplishing a greater, higher level of holiness, in the Dvarim from Teruma Mishkan and the materials that were donated to the Mishkan, and therefore there has to be an additional intent of Lishmi. The first Lishmi just brought them from that it should be in Hashem's possession. But if you want to raise it up from being in Hashem's possession to being something that is inherently holy, for that you need another Lishmi, and you need to build a Mishkan with the intent that everything that's going into it is Lishmi, and the holiness changes. It goes to a higher level. So if we now look at the Rashi, V'asu means, Rashi says V'asu, that there is something happening in the actual building of the Mishkan, and therefore it has to be Lishmi, it has to be for the sake of Hashem, because Mikdash, because we're not just making a house that is holy, has holiness in it, we're making a holy house, so we're elevating the money and the materials to a new level, and therefore we call it Mikdash, because we're sanctifying it, and therefore it has to be Lishmi, specifically, that this higher level should be for the sake of Hashem, and it has to be done in the V'asu, and that's why V'asu is included, and that's why it's all in one Dibra Maschil, because it's all addressing one issue, why the Torah uses the word Mikdash, and it's all telling us one thing, that this is going to a new level of holiness, and therefore it is done lishmi, for the sake of Hashem's name, to lift it to the next higher level of holiness. They also would have a practical halachic relevance. That when building the Mishkan, it's not enough that I'm doing it for Hashem, he has to specifically have in mind that he's doing it for the sanctity of the Mishkan. To leave their Bayis Kedosha, the special was come zu durch dem V'asu, that there's a unique and new holiness that is being accomplished through this V'asu that is more and beyond what was done because of the V'yikhuli, and that has to be in the mind of the builders and in the mind of the people that are working on the Mishkan. So this answers our questions. Why is there one Dibra Maschil? Because one Inyan. Why is it V'asu? Because it's in the V'asu that the materials are elevated to the next level. Lishmi, not Mishali, because in order to elevate it to the next level, it has to have another and a new Lishmi for the sake of Hashem's name. And why did it say Bayis Kedosha? Because he's saying, first of all, it's not Beis Kedusha, but it's Bayis Kedosha. It's a holy house, and this is why this is part of the mitzvah that the house itself should become holy, and this is why it needs to be Lishmi, and this is what this pasuk is telling us. In Sivav, the Rabbi is going to go back to the Rashi of Yikhuli Lishmi, and is going to talk about another aspect of that Rashi, where the next he says Teruma Hafrasha, and with that it's actually going to help us understand a little bit more. It's going to explain to us a little bit better this concept of that stage 1 where it becomes Mom and Hektish, and stage 2 where it's built into the Mishkan. What exactly are those two stages? We'll understand that by looking at an earlier Rashi, where Rashi says Shayafrishu Mimamainam Nedava, that they will designate or they will separate from their money a donation to the Mishkan. Sivav. According to this, we'll understand something new, another idea in Rashi. The word Teruma has two explanations. As the Targum says, to separate. The word Teruma means like lahafrish, to separate. Beis, another translation in Lashon Harama V'Agba, from the term of elevating. So Teruma could mean to separate, Teruma could mean to elevate. Rashi v'Pirushei ala Torah is Mefarish Kipirush Targum, Teruma hafrasha. Rashi here on V'yikchu li Teruma, Rashi says hafrasha, to separate. Now, but according to what we said until here, that we can explain the reason why Rashi uses the term hafrasha, by first explaining what really is the difference between hafrasha, separation, and harama, elevation. Hafrasha means that the zach is blaze abgeshet givaner von andere Sachen. Hafrasha means that it's separated. Das heißt, beim Husses, if I believe in the selben Gather, wie die andere Sachen, its definition remains the same. Der Chelek zwischen sie ist nur an verschiedene Makom Rishus. The difference is that it changed the location, or it changed owners. When you use the term to elevate, the definition has changed. The Zach is aufgeben geworden, the thing changed, it became higher, became elevated. Sie is in a hechere Ort to Madrege, it's in a higher space, it's on a higher level. As sie hat nicht kein Scheiches mit dem Ort und Meile von den Sachen zwischen welchen sie ist früher gewesen, to the point that it is somewhat removed from the other things that it was with beforehand. In other words, when it went from the person's pocket to Hektish, so they both look the same. They're both money or whatever the material is. It's just that before it was owned by him and now it's owned by the Eibishter. Harama means that now you can't compare it to the other thing. That other thing is choil. This is inherently holy. It became elevated to become defined in a new way. Und later Rashi does the teichen achilik zwischen die zwei Psukim v'yikchu li Teruma u'v'asu lemikdash. And according to Rashi, hafrasha and harama is the difference of what's happening in these two Psukim of v'yikchu li Teruma and v'asu lemikdash. The reading from v'yikchu li Teruma that gabbing mimena for Teruma samishkan is blazed b'gader hafrasha. The fact that they were v'yikchu li Teruma, they were donating, that was hafrasha. But l'afal piyah das givanim aman hektish, even though it became the money that belonged to hektish, is aber der yisoid v'gader hakdushim sadashin rishus. The parameters of its holiness is based on the fact that it changed owners. The fact that it transferred from the possession of the private person to the possession of holiness. When the Father is the Kedusha blaze al derech hanin shel hafrasha, says that and therefore this Kedusha is a limited Kedusha. It's only expressed in the fact that it's separated, removed from the other things. But when they actually built the Mikdash, when you take the donations and you make them part and parcel of the actual Mikdash, this elevates them. They are elevated into a higher level of holiness, which is removed higher than their previous situation. And therefore, by V'yikchu li Teruma, Rashi uses the word hafrasha because at that point all they're doing is they're separating it. But ultimately the point was to elevate it, and that's why there's another lishmi, because when it goes up to the next level, it needs another designation that it's being done for the sake of Hashem, that I'm changing and again, I'm elevating it again, and therefore there's another lishmi. So now the earlier taich that the Rebbe gave to the Rashi, the asu lishmi bayis or bayis kedaisha, now fits in so beautifully with the fact that earlier Rashi said hafrasha, that then also he said lishmi, but that was only the hafrasha was lishmi. Now by the asu lemikdash we're doing harama, and therefore there's another lishmi in order to facilitate the elevation of these materials. Siv zayin deira derfun b'seicham. The lesson to every single yid b'seich u'bavedes kalechad ve'echad. Every person must make from his own home a dwelling place for Hashem. As it is brought in the Alter Rebbe that every single Yid, he learns from this Maimer Chazal, that every single Yid must make a Mishkan, a dwelling place for Hashem, in his own heart, in his own soul. But as we said till now, there's two levels and there's two forms of Avodah. First, there is the V'yikchu li Teruma, which is the separation, and then there is the elevation. So first comes the Aveda of Afrasha of separation. Eid has to designate, separate his house from the other homes around him. As in sein Bayis, so sein Kentik as is anders, that the house should be recognizable that this is something different. When we're doing the same things, the same material or physical activities that we would do in any other house. Over by image to but in his house it's being done with a different purpose. Call everything being done lishmi for the sake of Hashem. It's still called your deeds because they are mundane. But they're being done for the sake of heaven. But their mitzvah is a mufrush removed from the chayil from the andere. And with this, the way it's being done is different. It's separated from everything else that is done. Tachlis is up, and it's a very beautiful level. Person should permeate his the things that he does in his house, that even though it's a regular mundane activity, but it's being designated and it's being dedicated to Hashem, l'shem shamayim. Beautiful. Tachlis is aber, but there is a greater purpose. As that there should be an elevation. The house has to be lifted up by transforming the entire house into a mikdash, not a home in which holy things are being done, but to make the home a holy home. This home does not contain any mundane things. There is a bayis kedosh, it's a holy house. A mikdash le'yizbarach, it's a dwelling, it's a sanctuary for Hashem. When everything, the house and everything that is in it, is permeated with the candle of the mitzvah, with the light of Torah, there's no mundaneness in this house. Bichlal, in the house in general, when yeder prat from the bayis and every detail of the house is in yonne, the mitzvahs of the Endruchim Gitan, is really all about the mitzvahs that are being done. So the house becomes a different entity. It's not a home that you could do holy things in it. It is a holy home, and that's the ultimate goal. That a person should turn his own private home into a mikdash le'yizbarach, and not just a home that he does holy things in it, but a home that is inherently holy. And through every yid, making their home to be a sanctuary for Hashem, it does the achana kreva. This is the very quick and speedy preparation. From binyan Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi to the rebuilding of the third Beis Hamikdash, the Mikdash Adnai Kaim Yadacha, the Mikdash that is established by the hands of Hashem, b'meheira v'yameinu.